The reign of Spain only fell on the plane of the European continent. They had lost their global crown and were a shadow. Football had transformed drastically since Spain painted their pretty patterns all over Kyiv against Italy in the Euro 2012 final. High possession football was disposed of. In its place was gegenpressing. It ruled Europe, first at club level when Germany's biggest clubs made up the 2013 Champions League final. The following summer, Germany won their fourth World Cup. Euro 2016 was a turning point where tactical ideologies would collide. And oh yeah, the competition was even bigger than ever. This is Euro 2016. The worst Euros, the most gargantuan Euros, the disgraced Euros, pick your poison, by way of a title for this one, the last documentary in this issue. Either way, it all came down to the genius of Michel Platini, a welcome addition to football as a player, a detriment to football as an administrator. It didn't matter that he was taken out as part of a wider corruption investigation against Sepp Blatter and FIFA 9 months out from the tournament. It was his concoction, his grandiose idea to inflate the tournament to 24 teams. There was an argument to be had that the European Championships needed expanding. There had been group stages in the past 4 editions featuring incredible teams falling by the wayside too early. There had also been, thanks to the luck of the draw, some bang average ones reach the quarterfinals and even semi-finals. Quite why football administrators feel the need to persist with the clearly incomprehensible transition of a 24-team tournament between the expansion from 16 to 32 nations remains unbelievable. It makes a mockery not only in allowing some third-place teams through but others not, despite facing different teams. Also, the rewards for finishing top of the group are a complete lottery. Taking this summer's tournament for example, the runner-up of England's group will face the winner of Germany's group. Meanwhile, the runner-up from Germany's group will also face a runner-up, this time from the group containing Italy, Spain or Croatia. The conclusion is a frantic end to the group stages where teams risk resting players when they shouldn't and where third-place teams live in hope for a week, only to be told come the end of it that, sorry, you're not good enough because some other dosser in another group has a better goal difference than you. Before we get onto the lay of the land, let's examine the 16 best ranked teams who didn't qualify to see what a truly fair Euros would look like as a 32-team prospect. They're on screen now. And who out of us can determine that they wouldn't be good enough for the tournament? Out of those, there's only Lithuania, Georgia and Cyprus ranked below Albania, the lowest ranked team to make the competition in 2016. Added to those, Lithuania and Cyprus, there's only Israel, Belarus and Montenegro who haven't appeared at a tournament in the 21st century yet. And even those 5 aren't rank outsiders. Lithuania, Belarus and Montenegro all contributed to former republics such as the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia, whilst Israel had attended the 1970 World Cup. These aren't pure melts that we're dealing with. Rushing through the field of competition, we've got France, buoyed by the management of Didier Deschamps, who were probably too early on in their rejuvenation but nonetheless had quality players such as poster boys Paul Pogba and Antoine Griezmann. Home advantage would count towards them, but the trophy shouldn't have been too much for consideration. Even less so for Switzerland, who by this point had built themselves up to be a capable last 16 tournament team. Guess where they finished in this tournament? Romania were a Romania without Georgi Hagi and still some ways from a threatening team, whilst Albania did well amidst a rocky group featuring Serbia and Denmark in qualification, as well as having quite a lot of their players pinched by countries like Serbia and Switzerland. England were running on fumes, with Harry Kane taking corners and Wayne Rooney deployed in midfield. The young crop of players, largely propped up by Tottenham Hotspur, was misguided in the final days of management by Roy Hodgson. Wales, however, had the momentum of appearing at their first tournament since 1958 and would be roared on by a sizable following. The only thing Russia promised to bring was fan violence after their heyday had been well and truly snuffed out by the likes of Algeria at the prior World Cup, while Slovakia had a decent team led by Marek Hamšík who could cause minute problems. Group C was the home of the world champions Germany, who hadn't been up to much since claiming their 4th Jules Rimet trophy. The expectation was, as ever, that they'd turn it on come the tournament's introduction. Awaiting them were neighbours Poland, still led and relying wholly on by Robert Lewandowski, whilst Ukraine were between two eras of talent and Northern Ireland's surprise inclusion was expected to be snuffed out fairly quickly. Spain had shed their world crown and now they were seemingly out to do the same to their European title after the veil of tiki-taka had been hurriedly ripped from them. Without much competition in Group D, they were still expected to get out of the groups, unlike in Brazil, and would face their greatest opposition from Croatia, who still kept hold of your favourite talent. Turkey and Czech Republic could, on their day, pitch up and do something, as the previous 3 Euros was a testament to, but it was hard to see either making an impact, both far beyond their peaks. The spreading thin of the elite teams meant that only Group E had anything like a contest to see who was top dog. Under Antonio Conte, Italy's malaise since the Euro 2012 final battering looks set to continue thanks to being faced with a fresher-faced and more talented Belgium. However, there was the suspicion that manager Mark Wilmots was holding back their largely Premier League-based talent. Rounding out the group were Sweden and Ireland, who strived for that third place spot and strived not to be embarrassed, unlike in 2012, where they were both the first eliminated. Group F saw Austria as the seeded team, but nobody could really see beyond Portugal, despite the Austrians' great work in qualification, which overinflated the opinion of pundits that they could be dark horses. Portugal, meanwhile, were shot. They had barrelled out of the World Cup in the group phase, and the days of relying on Cristiano Ronaldo were made even meeker by the diminished talent around him. Fernando Santos was hardly an inspiring manager, and the Seleção would do well to win a knockout game. Rounding off the field were Hungary, complying with the laws of physics in a different universe to the type of football they'd been accustomed to in the 1950s, whilst Iceland had seemingly nothing but team spirit. However, in a group where anybody could feasibly do anything, why not? As it dawned on the Stade de France faithful that the horrors of David Guetta's anthems would follow them around like a bad smell all summer, their compatriots did little to allay their fears on the pitch. Romania, a team that could draw from a minuscule pool of talent from Israel and Qatar for their players, were just skittles made to be knocked down by the powerful French bowling ball. Instead, it took a late Dimitri Payet rasper to seal an opening night victory. France didn't do much better against Albania in Marseille 5 days later, when Antoine Griezmann and Payet yet again both left it even later to hit a stoppage time double. In between, Switzerland had shown themselves up to not be much of a threat as they settled for a 5th-minute winner against Albania. An Albania that could count on half their team being non-Swiss heritage, whilst the inverse was true of the Swiss team. As such, there was one Xhaka brother apiece, as Granit commiserated Talent on his nation's loss. Then they stumbled to an even poorer point with Romania. With third place capable of producing a shabby knockout stage team, both France and Switzerland were qualified ahead of a truce in Lille that confirmed first and second respectively for the pacifists. A match that was only notable for the Switzerland shirts disintegrating after coming in contact with rainfall. Running concurrently in Lyon, Romania had the chance for a likely qualification with a win over the lowly Albania, allegedly the worst team in the competition, according to UEFA. Instead, Armando Sadiku ruined the party with Albania's first and so far last goal when I write this, and maybe afterwards too, at the European Championships. As it stood, Albania placed themselves in limbo, forced to remain in France with their record of 3 points from 3 games in third and a negative goal difference, not knowing for 3 days whether it was worth remaining in the country. Surely Group B would be more entertaining, with the Battle of Britain between England and Wales and the very real threat of some Russian violence on the terraces to spice things up a bit. Either way, it all kicked off in poignant fashion with a hearty rendition of Land of My Fathers before Gareth Bale took 10 minutes to score Wales' first European Championship goal, and the clubless Hal Robson-Kanu saved 3 points at the death with a late winner. The late goal that evening would be further celebration for Wales, as a shoddy England had their Eric Dyer equaliser cancelled out by a calamitous Vasily Berezutsky equaliser. All that was forgotten on the other side of a stupendous Marek Hamsik display in Lille as Slovakia dispatched of Russia. The following day, it was time for England versus Wales, one of the standout matches from a group stage with admittedly not much to write home about. If Joe Hart had potentially been at fault for Russia's equaliser on match day 1, there could be nobody else to blame for Gareth Bale's 40-yard speculative free kick squirming underneath his jelly-like grasp. But England rallied, and thanks to their substitutions of Jamie Vardy, who bagged the equaliser, the fresh Marcus Rashford, who proved dangerous down the left, and Daniel Sturridge, who squeaked the winner in to break Welsh hearts. We didn't know it at the time, but probably could have fucking guessed from the incompetent performances that this would be England's peak. Welsh peaks were so far in the distance, you could barely make them out through the fog. That fog cleared somewhat as Wales tossed aside the Russians in Toulouse, dumping them out of the tournament as they rightfully deserved for their antics both on and off the pitch. Their stalwarts Aaron Ramsey and Gareth Bale came to Wales' rescue, whilst an all-too-rare Neil Taylor goal was wedged in between in a comfortable 3-goal triumph. Less said about the game that ran simultaneously in Saint-Etienne, the better. The Stade Geoffroy Guichard was the scene of one of the best games of World Cup football England had ever been involved in 1998 when they drew with Argentina. Here, a pale imitation of football broke out amongst 90 minutes of boring football. Roy Hodgson lost whatever momentum the nation had when he only retained the spine of Joe Hart, Gary Cahill, Chris Smalling and Eric Dyer centrally, whilst Adam Lallana was the only survivor of a 3-man frontline that had seen out the win over Wales. As a result, a meek 0-0 scoreline that surrendered England a place in the kind half of the draw with all the small fries and fed them down a path to the big fish. After the stalemate, Roy Hodgson remarked, "Soon we'll make someone pay." It meant little then, and after a whole 7-day break, it meant even less. Like Romania, Northern Ireland had a small pool to draw on for their ragtag bunch of players, but found spirit in a summer where their supporters, and everyone else's presumably, sung about a generic EFL forward being on fire, as Michael O'Neill got a tune out of their players. First though, they had to suffer through their first tournament match in 30 years when Arkadiusz Milik grabbed Poland's only goal in a match that was only going one way. Unsurprisingly, in a match billed by nobody as Robert Lewandowski versus Kyle Lafferty, the Bayern striker unsurprisingly won out. Later on that evening in Lille, Germany likewise had just about enough to get beyond Ukraine, whose wingers caused the centre-halves disguised as full-backs Jonas Ekter and Benedikt Howardez problems. Nonetheless, quality told as Skodran Mustafi and Bastian Schweinsteiger found the net in what ultimately proved a simple match in an increasingly simple group. Ukraine's time in the tournament, even when 3 teams could qualify, looked to be expiring the first out of the 24-team field when they met Northern Ireland in Lyon. Football ultimately was the last thing on some Ukrainians' minds after what would become known as the first Russian invasion into the Donbass region had sparked tension and paranoia between factions in the camp. The divide seen there was nowhere to be seen in the Northern Irish camp, and it could be seen as the greatest performance this side of their 1-0 win over Spain in 1982. Kyle Lafferty was out, Gareth McCauley and Niall McGinn this time grabbed the goals, which steps Northern Ireland out into contention for a last 16 berth. Later that night, another soulless 0-0 played out between teams simply content with a point, safe in the knowledge that they probably couldn't be caught by the more lacklustre teams in the group. Still, Germany and Poland's placid football continued into the final match days, albeit this time in 1-0 victories performed in stereo, thanks to Jakub Blaszczykowski's strike against Ukraine and Mario Gomez's effort against Northern Ireland. In limiting the damage, Northern Ireland were ranked ahead of Albania in the 3rd place rankings and now needed one group from the other half of the draw to turn out in their favour. Later on that night, they'd find their answer. But before we rush ahead to the finish of another group, there was actually some drama and decent football to be had from the 4th group of this bloated championships. Croatia were one of the first teams to show up at Euro 2016 and play football to what was close to their actual level when they demolished Turkey. Unfortunately, they'd only be able to celebrate a 1-goal victory thanks to a stunning Luka Modric volley. Comparatively, Czech Republic showed virtually zero effort to defeat Spain and were undeserving of the point that they almost grabbed. In shades of 4 years prior and for a loss of the interim period, Spain dominated the ball but couldn't carve out many by way of actual opportunities. They had Gerard Piqué's late header to thank for all 3 points. 4 days later, Croatia had the chance to qualify with a win and were coasting despite not really deserving much of a 2-goal lead. Then, out of nowhere, the Czechs roared back to claim a point via Milan Skoda and the less vehicularly named Thomas Nesid. Results elsewhere, however, would confirm Croatia's place in the last 16 before they could meet Spain. Spain, who finally turned up, even if it was to dispatch of a criminally undercooked Turkey thanks to a brace from an actual forward of Alvaro Morata, as well as Nolito. Turkey was left a little too late, like those leftover sandwiches you're still eating in January, and even the driest of performances against the Czech in Lons resulted in a victory. Then 3 points with a -2 goal difference and 2 goals left Albania all but out and Turkey seemingly destined to follow them. Either way, their failure to pump Czech Republic by 4 goals meant that Northern Ireland could reschedule their flights back to Belfast. They, alongside fellow qualifiers Slovakia, still didn't know, though, where they'd be playing their last 16 football. In the meantime, an actual diversion to the script when Croatia and Spain met. Finally, La Roja had seemingly hit the ground running when comparative goal machine struck in 7 minutes, Alvaro Morata. A point was all that was needed, and it seemed destined to be that way when Nikola Kalinic levelled on the stroke of half-time, only for Ivan Perisic to do what Croatians usually do at football tournaments, and that is upset the narratives. Now the picture looked bleak for Spain. They'd face Italy, and then if they were fortunate to get through that, probably a Germany or a France afterwards. Meanwhile, no former European champions stood in Croatia's way. In a group that was supposedly telegraphed as Belgium edging Italy out as favourites and Sweden probably stealing a spot via the third place back door, the evening of June 13th, 2016 threw all those expectations out of the window. With Jeff Hendrick performing like a peak Lionel Messi, Ireland launched everything at Sweden at the Stade de France and deservedly led through Wes Hoolahan after the break. Irish eyes wouldn't be smiling, however, thanks to Kieran Clark's own goal, which undeservedly handed Sweden a point. Now with their 2 biggest opponents to come, few gave both Ireland and Sweden a chance to qualify in 3rd place. It breathed life into the futures of both Albania and Turkey, however, the more the group stages progressed in this utterly wank format. If Italy had been impressive but creaking with age in previous editions, then Antonio Conte blew all of that out of the water in Lyon when he named the oldest Euros starting 11 of all time, and it featured a just who the fuck is that of Italian players. Marco Porolo, Graziano Pella and Eder all started. Yet still they had enough to dispatch of an overawed Belgian team thanks to a smart finish from Emmanuel Giaccherini and a clincher from Graziano Pella. Belgium had started the tournament as they meant to go on. Allegedly, in preparation, they had lined up their starting 11 against the reserves who were in Italy's 3-5-2 formation. When the reserves won 4-0 in the training game, it should have been enough to pack their suitcases before the game was even played. Thankfully, they claimed the respite of Ireland 4 days later, as Romelu Lukaku's double helped Belgium to their biggest ever Euros win in Bordeaux. Italy, however, hadn't fared much better against Sweden earlier on in the day, needing an 88th minute winner from Eder for their 2nd win. And that was all they needed to confirm top spots ahead of their final encounter in Lille with Ireland. A group that started with an Italian team in comfort and 3 twitchy teams looking over their shoulder and capable of finishing in all kinds of contorted positions remained goalless for more than 80 minutes until the deluge of final day drama. Wes Hoolahan had a glorious chance to win it for the Irish late on, but spurned a 1-on-1. If ever there was a chance to replicate the heroes of Giant Stadium from 1994, it was against this Italian team, who rested 9 of their regulars. They would get another chance, but not before Sweden nearly took a surprise lead in Nice through Andreas Granqvist. Unfortunately for the Swedes, it led to their downfall as Eden Hazard broke on the counter and laid the winner on a plate for Radja Nainggolan. It wouldn't be his last insane goal of the tournament, as Belgium all but confirmed themselves into the last 16. And whilst there remained no news from Lille, the only nation that benefited were Turkey, who would confirm their continuation in the tournament if Ireland didn't snatch a surprise 3 points. Then, Robbie Brady leapt highest in the box to give Ireland the biggest footballing party they had had in nearly 14 years. They were remaining in Europe, as the Irish Times revelled in their headline. A headline with more than a wink and a nod to the shambolic Brits across the Irish Sea, but it could come to serve a far funnier meaning later on in the week. And finally, closing out the group stages, we had the maddest and most entertaining group, and comfortable, the greatest group on the ice. Admittedly, it did take 4 days and some desperate football to reach that stage of compliance, however. Austria were earmarked as a team to watch for the first time since the 1970s, after they had stormed their qualification group, and the way they started against Hungary would have made the 1930s Wunder team blush. David Alaba, Austria's lone superstar, crashed one against the post. And with that, 30 seconds in, with a missed chance nonetheless, their European Championships had officially peaked. Hungary then put in the kind of effective rearguard performance that they would become famous for well into the 2020s, as Adam Saloy and Zoltan Steiber got second-half goals to turn the group on its head. If Group F wasn't dizzy yet, proceedings from Saint-Étienne cranked up the spin cycle a little further as the continent felt the ferocious Icelandic thunderclap for the very first time. Birkir Bjarnason grabbed their first Euros goal in an equalising Nani's first half effort, and Iceland bizarrely snatched a point from the Seleção. Portugal again underperforming as they attempted to serve a pale imitation of Cristiano Ronaldo, who was scuppered by a better designed team. Portugal didn't get much better 4 days later, toothless against Austria at the home of PSG, when they failed to do what Hungary had done and score against the morbid Austrians. Thanks to heroic Icelandic efforts earlier on in the day, with what should have been a win in the Velodrome against Hungary, Group F resembled a car crash heading into the final day. Hungary with 4 points had done enough. Iceland and Portugal's pair of draws ensured that if they drew on the final day with 3 points and a neutral goal difference, they too would progress, even in third place. Even though the Magyars had to rely on aged Premier League legends such as the 40-year-old Gabor Kiraly and Zoltán Gera, 37, they saved their best performance of the campaign for the last group game against an improved Portugal. Meanwhile, Iceland continued to surprise at the Stade de France when Jon Bodvarsson opened the scoring early on. By half-time, somehow Iceland were comfortable in second place as Nani and Zoltán Gera traded the goals in the other contest. It is only now where Group F became batshit. Inside of 15 second-half minutes, Hungary and Portugal went at one another as if Lyon was the final football stadium on earth. When Balázs Zuzak snatched one goal, Ronaldo would impudently backheel in an equaliser. When Hungary somehow contorted the Portuguese defenders to deflect in Hungary's third effort, Ronaldo almost immediately hit another one in. Amongst the noise, Austria had found a goal too. What it all meant was simple. Iceland and Portugal were going through without winning a game, Hungary were top despite holding on to just 5 points, and Austria were out, having barely laid down a marker with 1 goal and 1 point. So they had to push on. The Austrian goal difference was just about good enough that a winner in Paris would sneak them into the last 16. Meanwhile, Iceland were cool with a point in third, but 3 points would be even better. As Austria mounted attack after attack, roughly 3% of Iceland's population was crammed into the Stade de France to hold firm alongside them. No news meant Portugal versus England and Iceland versus Croatia. An Icelandic goal meant Iceland versus England and Portugal versus Croatia. An Austrian goal, the likeliest outcome as the clock creaked by in slow motion, meant Austria versus Croatia and Portugal versus England. As Roy Hodgson relaxed on a boat down the River Seine instead of scouting possible opponents, everything kicked off in the capital. A failed Austrian attack led to the greatest moment in Icelandic football when Arne Traustason broke on the counter and found a last-gasp winner. The lieutenant Roy Hodgson sent to the Stade de France was as jubilant as the Icelandic commentator who wailed down his microphone in celebration. Gary Neville was pictured manically celebrating the Icelandic winner, as the smallest nation in European Championship history would be paired off with the lucky English in the last 16. It was the greatest moment in Iceland's footballing history. It took only 5 days to be surpassed. The only upside to 36 group matches, shaving off just 8 participants in the competition, was more white-knuckle knockout stage football, as the last 16 stage of the Euros became a thing. June 25th saw 3 games of football. A true festival was promised. a morbid clown show attempting to represent the sport was played out. Switzerland and Poland were first up in St Etienne, pitting two mid-tier European nations with one guaranteed first-time quarter-finalist. There should have been everything to play for. Switzerland had been here at two of the previous three World Cups and had vast experience compared to Poland. Yet they wilted. Only a quite frankly ludicrous Xherdan Shaqiri overhead kick kept the Swiss alive as they made do with penalties in a scared performance. Unfortunately, Granit Xhaka was the penalty victim that somehow had a bang-average Polish outfit into the quarter-finals. Next, Wales and Northern Ireland met at the Parc des Princes in a match that would barely be fitting of Rodney Parade or whatever dirt track Glentoran or Linfield play at. Neither team truly huffed and puffed across a stale 90 minutes where another two potential first-time quarter-finalists appeared too scared to break the door down. Instead, the unfortunate Gareth McCauley did everybody a favour and spared them from 30 more minutes of a slog when diverting a tame cross into his own net. Croatia and Portugal, on paper one of the more enticing matches in the last 16, was depressingly disappointing as well. Fernando Santos had joked about winning the European Championship with only draws, but they recorded a fourth straight regulation time tie that was only stemmed from a penalty shootout thanks to a late Ricardo Quaresma goal. In truth, neither team deserved it after 90 minutes of zero shots on target from another terrified band of teams. Understandable from those that hadn't been in a Euros knockout game before, but not of two supposedly great teams. The following day saw three matches and a whole Sunday off work to enjoy them in. All lived up to expectations, not necessarily in a good way, with the only drama to be gleaned from the heroic efforts of Ireland in Lyon. When Slovakia and Hungary rolled over and had their bellies tickled by Germany and Belgium later on in the day, Ireland shot first against the hosts when winning a penalty in the very first minute. Robbie Brady, continuing his rampant heroism from Lille, converted. As the match wore on, another little wrinkle of UEFA's incompetence was pretty evident. Ireland had 3 days' notice for this game, whilst their allegedly superior hosts had almost a week. It told when Antoine Griezmann broke Irish resolve with 2 goals in 3 minutes. When a fatigued Shane Duffy saw a straight red shortly after, the jig was up. When Monday saw to the climax of the last 16, the Euros was finally graced with its first big names falling since the Dutch failed to even qualify months prior. First off, David De Gea was roundly at fault for the build-up to Giorgio Chiellini's screamer from 14 centimetres out. Then it was a game where they deserved to win more convincingly, but Italy capped off the display with a clincher from Southampton's Graziano Pella in stoppage time. Without really having to be too good despite chalking up wins over both Spain and Belgium, Antonio Conte's old-timers had reached the latter stages. Less could be said in that respect about Roy Hodgson in England, who dawdled blindly into the challenge of Iceland in Nice. Their vision was even further impaired when Wayne Rooney smashed in inside 4 minutes from the spot. Everything was going to plan. Little old Iceland would do the right thing and roll over, and Hodgson's prediction that an opponent would take a mauling off the Three Lions would happen. They'd ease to victory, and then the real challenge would start with France in Paris. Then reality hit, and England turned in the kind of performance you wouldn't even expect out of a Biggleswade town. First up, the Three Lions were tamed by a long throw into the box. Then Joe Hart flapped at a pure P-roller as though he had cheese slicers for hands. 16 minutes had been played, but even then, England looked wildly out of their depth. The subsequent 74 minutes showed nothing, and for the second time in 4 days, England were out of Europe. After a wild week where the British public voted to leave the EU and the teams of Northern Ireland and England followed them in shooting themselves in the foot from a football perspective, all there was left was Wales. Northern Ireland had already experienced their peak, Wales were approaching theirs, and England were seemingly caught in an inescapable valley like a legless spider in a dollhouse bath. At least they all had the grass is greener Brexit to look forward to. Moving on to the quarter-finals, it took just 2 minutes for Robert Lewandowski to end his barren spell in front of goal for the national team. What was his only shot on target throughout Euro 2016 was never going to be enough, as Portugal were fated to draw for the 5th match in succession. Only this time, they had no extra time drama to contend with. Cristiano Ronaldo had learned his lessons from their Euro 2012 exit and led the way in the shootout, first by imploring João Moutinho to take a kick after his failed attempt in Ukraine. Both scored as Jakub Błaszczykowski was the only player to miss from 12 yards. Somehow, despite not winning a game of regulation football, Portugal were into a semi-final. Joining them would be the winner of Wales or Belgium, which most assumed would be the latter given that Wales had an unemployed man leading the line, whilst Belgium could count on the likes of Kevin De Bruyne, Eden Hazard and Romelu Lukaku. The match was going very much to form thanks to another Oranje Nainggolan thunder bastard. Then the collection of superstars showed their inexperience as a unit, their manager showed his fallibility and they crumbled after Ashley Williams levelled on the half hour. When Hal Robson-Kanu transformed into the Valley's version of Johan Cruyff and scored one of the greatest Welsh goals of all time, Belgium were done and dusted. Only a Sam Vokes header before the end confirmed it, and Wales' incredible place in the final four, probably to be served a draw with the Portuguese, was confirmed. As four unwashed, inexperienced nations scrambled around in the dark for the semi-final light switch, you could be sure that the combined 6 European championships of Germany, Italy and France would show them the way. Instead, Germany were very un-Christmassy from the spots against their eternal rivals Italy. Eventually one curse had to give way in Bordeaux. Simone Zaza tried his best to ensure Germany's rich history of penalties would continue by tap dancing in the penalty area before trying to reunite the football with his family down in Italy. And then each of Thomas Muller, Mesut Ozil and Bastian Schweinsteiger each tried to give Italy back the owners on account of the Azzurri's invincibility against Germany at major tournaments. In major tournaments, Germany had taken 28 penalties in shootouts and had missed just 2. Uli Hoeneß in the 1976 European Championship final and Uli Stalike in the 1982 World Cup semi-final. It had taken them 5 more kicks to miss 3 more. All bets were now off when it came to curses and witchcraft. Suddenly, everyone started scoring until Matteo Darmian's tame effort. Jonas Hector's equally wretched kick, however, squirmed under the grasp of Gigi Buffon. Penalties and Germany, they moved on to meet France. France, who showed everyone how to perform against Iceland by racking up a 4-goal lead over the smallest nation at the championships. Typically, Iceland showed fight, scoring twice, probably more than England would have done, as France recuperated a 5th and some confidence into the semi-finals. In a field that kept Portugal, Wales, France and Germany the favourites were to be gleaned from the second semi-final. Before we could reach that point, a quick-fire double in their first regulation win in timely fashion, Portugal eloped to the final thanks to Cristiano Ronaldo and Nani. For Wales, a timid end to what had been an endlessly proud summer, ultimately when bringing on players such as Simon Church and Johnny Williams, both of MK Dons, the difference in quality had to tell eventually. Chris Coleman demanded more tournament football out of his nation. They would return for the Euros 5 years later and another knockout phase, albeit in a last 16 defeat, before a first World Cup in a lifetime ended prematurely at the hands of England in the groups. Next in Marseille, what many were calling the true final as the hosts met the world champions. The latter performed better in the first period, yet found themselves trailing after Bastian Schweinsteiger bewilderingly handled the ball in the box. After converting from the subsequent kick, banishing demons from the previous month's Champions League final, Antoine Griezmann and France had enough momentum to motor through to the final. A second goal for the Atletico Madrid player confirmed not only France's spot in their home final against Portugal, but Griezmann's golden boot to go with it. Waiting for both teams was a moth invasion, thanks to someone keeping the floodlights on overnight. So, when you try to picture the Euro 2016 final and you see the devastated Cristiano Ronaldo being carted off injured after 25 minutes in what was supposed to be his finest night in a Portugal shirt, or Eder grabbing the surprising Portuguese winner in extra time, your mind will be scarred by the moths. Moths everywhere. A flappable end to a flappable tournament. UEFA, much like in 1980 or 1996, made a rod for their own back by bloating the European Championships far beyond its means. 16 teams, even in 2024, appears the ideal number for a continental competition. The more teams like Hungary, Iceland and Wales overperform and grow the game all over the continent, however, the more likely a bigger Euros becomes more acceptable. Unfortunately, no matter how good European football gets, 24 teams in its current cumbersome format won't ever be the answer. It gauges for punishment and reward are skewed. Just how can it be that an all-conquering group winner with a 100% record be gifted the same present as a team who snuck in the back door without a win to their name? It appears inevitable now that the European Championships will become 32 teams, and it won't even dilute the competition so much. Is there seriously much difference in quality between a 17th ranked Poland and a 32nd ranked Bosnia? Both have appeared in and been competitive at recent World Cups. The safety net of a third place meant sheer tedium in the majority of the group matches, with a litany of processions as late as the quarter-finals. 12% of the goals were scored across 2 games. The entire tournament was shambolic. There were good stories from Iceland and Wales, but the winners Portugal were of such a poor quality that they won just 1 match in regulation time. Whilst we're allowing the COVID-postponed Euro 2020 a little time to breathe before we analyse it, we've got one more documentary during this European Championship group phase. A film about a nation, guess who, out tomorrow.